Now I get asked so much to guide K2. And my answer every time is no, regardless of the amounts of money I and Alpenglow Expeditions have been offered. And then the second piece is Topo supported me and Kala to do this, and he climbed with oxygen. He very badly wants to climb K2 without supplemental oxygen and asked me a few years ago if I'd go back and support him like he did me. And my answer was no. I will not go back to a route on that mountain that goes through the bottleneck. Hello and welcome to the Duffel Shuffle. I'm Adrian Ballinger, and we're here to discuss the world of climbing and skiing in all its forms through the eyes of mountain guides.
And I'm Sam Kiekefer. In each episode, we'll unpack exhilarating stories, share invaluable insights, and get up close and personal with some of the most experienced and passionate guides and athletes in the industry.
Whether you're a seasoned alpinist or a weekend warrior, the Duffel Shuffle is your ticket to the thrilling world of climbing, skiing, and mountaineering. Join us.
Welcome back. This is episode 36 of the Duffel Shuffle podcast. We've got an awesome episode coming up. We're going to talk all things K2. On this podcast, we talk a load about Everest, an unfair amount about Mount Everest. And today we get to talk a little bit about K2 with Adrian. But first, we'll dive into news. Adrian, how's it going?
So good. Back in Tahoe. Have we recorded in Tahoe recently? I'm trying to think when our last episode. We did Emily's episode Emily. From here. That's right. So I've been home for so long, I can't even remember. And
2 weeks.
It's been great. Full summer. I kind of feel like as we were going into this podcast and my admittedly slight lack of preparation for the episode, I did a little less research than I often do, research and planning. And I was thinking it is August. And like actually most of my favorite podcasts right now that I listen to, they're like Scott Galloway, Pivot, Ezra Klein, Ross Douthat. They're all on vacation. They're all rerunning episodes, or they're doing like these random things. So I'm like, maybe this one's going to be a little shorter today, maybe a little more loose, and that's okay because it's August. The Euros have it right. Take August off.
I didn't realize that rerunning podcast episodes was an option. Can we start doing that?
I don't know if we're quite there yet to be running that like best of from 3 years ago. Or actually, I like what a couple of the podcasts are doing. They're running podcasts from other podcasts that either they've been guests on or just like favorite pods. I think that's a cool little way, like kind of like seeding across podcasts. We could play with that sometime.
You've been on a handful of podcasts. We could just get those audios and that's, 7-8 episodes right there, right?
Sounds like you really want a vacation, Sam. How's it going?
Oh, life's crazy right now, but it's good. Summer is awesome. I mean, the weather in Tahoe has been awesome. And I've been doing mini family adventures, which I'm kind of itching for something bigger. But at this point, it's been great. And we have 2 kids under 2 and we're adapting and adjusting and figuring it out.
Yeah. Awesome. I imagine the adapting and adjusting, I think we're a little bit in cruise mode right now, except for, deciding that since we are at home for 2 weeks straight, we'll start trying the whole potty training thing. So Arrow's basically been naked for the past few days and just peeing and pooping everywhere in the house. So that's kind of fun.
Yeah, the brave thing about that is that you chose 2 weeks before you have a very long flight to South America, and rather than that, the farthest part of South America you can go to. So I'm excited to hear about the potty training adventures while on LATAM Airlines.
Totally. Let's see how it goes. It is interesting. I don't know if I mentioned this on a podcast in the past few weeks, but we're going to Patagonia next week to go skiing. I often go skiing in the summer, I realized, but it's usually on big mountains. So it's really terrible skiing. It's descending with skis on. I've done a lot of, whether it's in Peru or Bolivia or, obviously the Himalaya, things like that, where you're kind of leaving in August. So I have done lots of summer ski trips, but this might be my first where I'm doing a summer ski trip that is actually just meant to be fun, like more type 1 than type 2. We're going to Patagonia, tagging along on an Alpenglow Expeditions ski trip to Cerro Castillo. So we're going to be skiing with the Alpenglow crew a bit, as well as skiing for ourselves with our filmer friend Clayton. We're also bringing Arrow and adventure nanny Amelia. So it should be really fun. But yeah, it turns out I've been to Patagonia so many times, but it's been a few years. And I forgot how far it is and how hard it is to get to. Over the past decade, flights to Asia, to the Himalaya, have gotten way easier. They're almost all one stop. Whether I'm going to Pakistan, Tibet, or Nepal, it's one stop somewhere in Asia, somewhere in Southeast Asia, and then on. It's super simple. Or going the other direction through Istanbul and Turkey and on. One stop, always. And all of a sudden, I've got a flight that's like 4 stops, takes 34 hours. And some of the flights are long.
Your flight from SFO or California to Santiago is 12 hours.
It's so long. And so kind of reminded me like, yeah, the planet, it's a long way to go this way as well as this way. And somehow my brain had removed
blacked that out.
Yeah, just that was one fact that I didn't need to keep in my brain. And now I'm like, ooh, it's a lot. So, and we booked it late. So we're like, middle seats, family not together, all the things that just make it so much more fun. So,
and potty training.
So stay tuned. I'm sure we'll do an episode from Chile or Patagonia, and I look forward to telling you my thoughts. Also, it sounds like even though a big storm is barreling down on Chile right now, Patagonia has had one of its drier seasons in quite some time. So, yeah, we might be rock climbing and hiking.
Yeah. Travel is always fun. It's all about the adventure, right? Who cares about this quality of skiing?
I am truly so excited. This right now does feel like the right cadence for me. It's like 2 big trips a year. So kind of had Everest in the spring. It was fantastic. I learned so much. I had a really special trip. And now I've had a lot of time kind of rock climbing and with family, and Alpenglow's just been off the hook busy. And so got to spend a lot of time in the office and with my crew there. And now it feels like the right time to go and have a single focus again, which is this trip.
Right on. Well, I've got some public bathroom potty training P tips for you. I'll share after the fact.
You mean he's not just going to go in a wag bag when we tell him to?
Yeah, good luck. Well, let's dive into news. I wanted to talk about fall Himalaya skiing.
Oh, awesome.
Andre Bergel, the famous skier from Poland who skied K2 as well as other 8,000 meter peaks. I think he's got 8 on his list now. He's got 8,000 meter peak ski descents without oxygen. He's just he's making a little bit of a splash in K2. There was a Red Bull film, but at the same time, he's kind of like subtly just ticking off no oxygen ski descents in 8,000 meter peaks, as well as other technical ski descents around the world. He's announced his plans to go back to Everest. So I believe he's tried unsuccessfully twice before. I believe conditions were kind of what challenged him. Conditions, both snow conditions and weather conditions, were what challenged him on his previous 2 attempts. And he's heading back. And I think one thing that's really interesting to me about this story is Everest, the way he puts it is he wants to get Everest done before it's no longer possible. And I think that his argument is that with climate change, it's just not going to be feasible to do a complete ski descent of Everest. And I'm curious to see how it goes for him.
Yeah, I'm so excited for this. I mean, this, of course, ties back into my news story from last time. Tyler Andrews announcing his fall plans, Killian announcing his fall plans. When we heard Tyler was going to Everest this fall, it only would work financially to be sharing the cost of putting in the ice fall and some of the infrastructure with other teams going. And there was mention of 2 teams at least. So I was kind of wondering what that other objective might be. It could have just been a commercial team, but this is super exciting. We've talked a lot about, or a decent amount about Andre on this podcast. Like, he made a generational change to our sport. I think in some ways the same as like when Honnold free soloed El Cap. All the ski mountaineers previous to that, kind of like there were lower 8,000 meter peaks that had been done without supplemental oxygen, but none of the high ones. And then he went to one of the ones that had been unskied, K2, unsuccessfully attempted many times, chose one of the most challenging ones out there, made a link up of 4 different climbing routes in order to keep his skis on for as much as possible. Had to use ropes, of course. You can go on the TGR forums and people are making fun of his jump turns. And it's like, clearly people who have never been to those types of altitudes or in that type of snow. And then third, he did it without supplemental oxygen. And he just completely changed the game. There's just no way we can't consider him one of, if not the best high altitude ski mountaineer on the planet right now. And Everest has been his dream for a long time. I've talked to him about it. When I was interviewed for his film, a lot of the conversation was around that. And now he's going back. And the previous seasons, like you said, like an interesting thing about the autumn and about ski mountaineering on the 8,000 meter peaks is for everything to align correctly, it very rarely happens. And I think Andrej clearly has that understanding. And we'll see if this is the year, but it's going to be fun to watch. I hope his style remains the same, attempting without supplemental oxygen. And I hope he, since he's announced it before going, I hope we hear the story kind of like as it unfolds, because there's going to be wild ups and downs and twists and turns. And while I won't be there this season, I'm really excited to follow along.
And I think Everest, ski descents of Everest are they have an interesting history. And certainly there have been ski descents of Everest previously. I believe Kit Delorier, Jimmy Chin have all made somewhat of ski descents of Everest. And do you know much about what he plans to ski on Everest and how, complete of a descent is possible for him and how that compares to previous descents?
Yeah, no, it's a good question. I don't know yet what route. And that's kind of the question everyone's been asking. I actually received a number of phone calls after the news was announced asking me if I knew, because it's a big open question. I love to just put myself out there so I can then be proven wrong. My guess is the normal route.
South side,
Nepal, definitely south side. But my guess is the normal route on the south side. But there are definitely other potential ski lines from the south side, so I'd love to be proven wrong. In terms, we should do a whole podcast sometime and bring on a better historian than me for the ski descents that have been made. You're absolutely right. There's been a number of ski descents on Everest. Most or all with various different asterisks, everything from taking skis off for thousands of feet to not starting until thousands of feet below the summit to using supplemental oxygen. And then there's people like me who have skied big chunks of the mountain, like most of the Lhotse face and into the ice fall, but in no way made a ski descent because I didn't go to the top in my ski gear. And so, but I think if I had to choose, there has been one really there have been many impressive ski descents of Everest, but the most impressive to me is, and I hope I get this right now without having it in front of me, I made a mistake. I mentioned Hans Kammerlander making this super impressive ski descent, the only one to actually put their skis on the summit of the mountain and ski down to base camp without taking their skis off. It was actually Davo Karnakar. Hans Kammerlander did make a notable attempt actually on the north side of the mountain, but he down climbed a few hundred meters of the line. It was Davo Karnakar who on the south side of the mountain put his skis on top and less than 5 hours later made it to base camp without ever taking off his skis. Often considered the one or primary complete ski descent of Everest to date. He used oxygen like people always had on these 5 tallest mountains, the 5 that sit above 8,500 meters. But skis never came off. Used ropes in a few places. Obviously, the ice fall is complicated to get through, and he used not only ropes, but also, I believe, some ladders. But that's been my style. My filmer Griff loves to make fun of me on Makalu because I didn't want to take my skis off. That, to me, is a ski descent, but it can get pretty silly at times when you're on full, pure vertical rock with your skis still on. But minimizing how much you take your skis off and down climb is number one to me. Then second is minimizing rope use is number 2. And then now not using oxygen is kind of like a third bar that I think just allows us to talk about these different things. This isn't to take away from anyone who skis any part of Everest is blows my mind, right? It's incredible. But as long as we're really clear about those points and how much we did or didn't take our skis off, down climb, use ropes, use oxygen, then let's go.
Right on. Well, it'll be fun to follow along, and hopefully we can get some good insight as to what's going on the mountain and how progress is being made.
Yep, absolutely.
Well, what do you have?
Well, you brought it up, our happy August news of autumn attempts happening and all the fun stuff that we're going to get to follow the next few months. This isn't exactly bringing it down, but I did, I think it's notable that K2 that we've mentioned sort of on this podcast over the past month or two, and we're going to speak in more detail about today, the season has now ended there. And there were really three notable things about the season. What we've talked about on the last few podcasts is that it was a really difficult season. It was warm, it was dry. Many people were talking about dangerous rockfall on the mountain and that just hadn't been a good window. As of 10 days ago, the ropes didn't even go up to the high camp yet on the mountain. They had not made it to Camp 3, the highest camp on the mountain at about 7,900 meters. And a vast majority of teams, much like in my season, called it and went home. But some didn't. And people stayed until August. And there has been plenty of history over the years of summits of K2 in August. And that is exactly what happened. On August 11th and August 12th, almost 40 people ended up summiting K2. And so I think first, congratulations should be given to those people that, maintained faith, didn't give up hope, suffered through an entire long season of really hard conditions, from what I understand, and summited and got back down safely. Of course, the catch and flip side to that is that not everyone did get down safely. And there were 2 fatalities on K2 this season. One actually quite early in the season. A Pakistani climber porter named Iftikhar Hussain was killed by rockfall below Camp 1. And then on the descent from the summit, a second climber, a client of Imagine Nepal, Jingguan, was also killed by rockfall in the same place below Camp 1. And I think it's important to, 40 people summited, 2 people killed. A lot of times that's how we look at summit ratios. That's a 5% or kind of like summit to death ratios is a lot of times how people have looked at these numbers. 5% fatality rate. 10 years ago, that number was 21% for K2. So purely by the numbers, this was not a bad season. But I think there's more hidden in those numbers. From talking to Sherpa who were there, it's my understanding there were many serious injuries, broken bones, concussions, unconscious climbers from rockfall, many meaning, more than a half dozen, less than everyone on the mountain, including a rescuer that attempted to save Jingguan, like real, very serious injuries that might have long-term consequences. That's something that we should acknowledge. Another sort of interesting data point, the only 3 teams that stayed were Nepali operated and led teams. All of the European and American teams left saying the mountain was too dangerous. Now, that's not to say there's a difference, it's an interesting thing to point out. That's not necessarily pointing out a difference between Nepali companies and foreign companies. I think we have to be really careful there. But what it is pointing out the companies that remained are the companies who don't, it seems, claim to have responsibility for the safety of their clients or workers, that they provide a service. It's primarily logistics, and you choose the risk profile. So while the American and the European companies generally have mountain guide leaders who make calls for the team of how much risk is too much risk, these more logistic style companies truly don't. And I think that was demonstrated. And so, that's not to call out these companies shouldn't have been there from me, but it's to very clearly understand that you must choose when you sign up for a trip, whether it's to Everest or K2. Do you want someone to help you with safety in those very hard emotional decisions? Or do you want to know that no matter how fucked up it is, it's go time?
Yeah, I mean, we can just dive into this topic for days, but it is interesting. And I, the more and more we talk about it, I think that those companies have a place in this world. It's about how they represent themselves that is the challenge. And also the fact that these expeditions are becoming more and more expensive due to a number of factors. And generally, the logistics style, kind of non-safety oriented decision-making trips are cheaper because they lack that one aspect of a mountain guide making decisions and calls for your safety. But there can be some kind of twisting of the rhetoric there to make it seem like you're getting a similar product for a cheaper price. And
Yeah,
that's
and I
the
think
challenge.
we should be careful. Like, it's not even to say all three companies these days weren't led by mountain guides, or some of them. It's that they just have I believe they have a completely different rationale around risk, and it's a choice. So it might not even be mountain guide or no, because there are now Nepali IFMGA mountain guides, and many of them own these companies or lead trips for these companies, but a really different rationale around what is acceptable risk. And I guess the one other thing that popped to my mind as you were just talking, like Alpenglow chose and chooses not to run K2 because we believe the fatality rate is unacceptable on it. It was unacceptable when it's 20%. It's still unacceptable when it's 5%.
And let me ask you real quick, and we'll talk more about this type of stuff in the episode, but the rockfall is not a typical accident causer in 8,000 meter climbing. I feel like generally in 8,000 meter climbing, you hear of fatalities being caused by altitude, by crevasse, serac, etc. Not rockfall as much. Is that specific to this season, or is that terrain on K2
it's
generally
specific to K2 and really Pakistan? A number of the Pakistan 8,000 meter peaks have really, really hot sections of the mountains that melt out and fall apart every season. I do think this was a remarkably bad season based on the photos that I saw. But finishing where I was going, so Alpenglow chooses not to run the trips. Furtenbach pulled out this year and didn't run any Pakistan trips. And Garrett Madison of Madison Mountaineering has been on this podcast and said he's planning on no longer running trips to K2 because it's too dangerous. So, I think there's been this experiment at guiding K2, and I think it will continue, and people will continue to want to climb it. But the Everest fatality rate is now below 1%. And even when commercial guiding started on Everest, it was in the 2% range. Considering something like a 5% fatality rate like this year, and small teams, and if you run that trip 5 years in a row or 10 years in a row as an expedition operator, there's no way you can't have multiple fatalities, just like how I feel about the Khumbu Icefall on the south side of Everest. And I think that's a very challenging both business and human decision to make. So all that to say, K2 has always been hard and dangerous. That's why we don't operate on it. And this year was a dry season, but some years are dry season, some years have a lot more Serac fall danger, some years have way more avalanche danger. It is a very dangerous mountain, and I think this season demonstrated that. So congratulations to those who summited. I certainly feel for the families of the people who were lost on the mountain, but to me, there were no surprises here.
Yeah. Well, we'll dive a little bit more into K2 in general, kind of not specific to this season, but just your experience on the mountain and your history with the mountain and decisions around guiding it and not guiding it coming up.
Sounds great.
All right, you're listening to episode 36 of the Duffel Shuffle podcast. This is going to be all about K2. So as I mentioned earlier, we talk obsessively about Mount Everest and very little about K2. Honestly, I was thinking about it. We probably talk more about Cho Oyu and Makalu and Manaslu and some of the other like Himalayan 8,000 meter peaks and less about Karakoram 8,000 meter peaks. And so let's do it. K2.
K2.
You just don't like K2. That's what it is, huh?
Oh, I love it. I can't believe you feel that way. I love that mountain. And I bet if you looked back to last year during the Pakistan season, it got some love.
I'm sure we talked about it. I'm sure we did.
Second tallest mountain in the world, 8,611 meters, just a tiny bit lower than Everest, but of course a significant. We've talked that last 500, 600, 800 feet, actually, at least in my experience, made a massive difference. But K2 really has its notoriety because it is so much more technically challenging than Everest. And I think I want to be really careful when I say that. That's not to say Everest is not technically challenging. We've talked quite a bit about that on this podcast. You're doing a lot of like crampon work on rock. There's steeper and steeper rock in various places on the mountain above 8,000 meters. There's loads of ice where you're front pointing. Everest is already hard. And then K2 just like knocks that up so much. Literally on K2, after you walk I don't know, I say 45 minutes. Maybe it's an hour and a half from base camp to the base of the roots, the ridges. You walk across a flat glacier for that first hour and a half, like a purely flat glacier. And then you turn, you start climbing one of the ribs, and every single step from there to the summit is technical. Some of it feels like steep rock, some of it feels like steep ice. Some of it, of course, is just big snowfields, but they're like, if you drop your water bottle on K2 anywhere, it is going all the way to the bottom onto the flat glacier. And the relief of that, once you're up high, is like 9,000 vertical feet. It is just wild and intense and rowdy. And all of that steepness means that anything that falls on the mountain, whether it's an avalanche, icefall, or rockfall, is incredibly dangerous. And it's really hard to avoid that danger as you climb it.
So you climbed K2 for your first and only time in 2019, is that correct?
That's right.
You climbed it without oxygen. Do you remember the day you summited?
Ooh, that's a great question. I'm going to say it was July 26th.
Okay.
It was definitely the very end of July. So the summer season is the Pakistan 8,000 meter season. And that's a fact that people are probably like, strangely partly aware of, but not the why, or it might not really make sense. It is really interesting. Like the spring and the fall seasons are the only seasons where you can climb the 8,000 meter peaks in Tibet and Nepal. And that's because of the way the monsoon, these big, wet, warm storms come up and interact with the main Himalayan range. Well, the Karakoram range, where K2 sits in Pakistan, is actually not the Himalaya. It's this additional range quite a bit further north and further west in the Asian continent. And the weather there is really very different. And the monsoon doesn't hit there until very, very late in the summer. And so its best climbing season is probably a little bit more like what we would experience in, places like the United States and Europe, where the good climbing season kind of starts in Nanga Parbat, which is the furthest south, kind of like in June, and then moves to these other 8,000 meter peaks in July, sometimes extends into August, and then finally the season sort of ends late summer.
And could you climb in Pakistan in, say, April and May?
Sure, and you are starting to see more exploration of the mountains from a skiing perspective in April and May. Of course, there's also been winter ascents, right? My friend Corey Richards, who made the first 8,000 meter peak winter ascent for an American, that was done in Pakistan in the winter. So you can have winter ascents. And I think, I'm not a climatologist, but obviously spend quite a bit of time thinking about these things as a mountain guide and also as part of Protect Our Winters. Like, I think Pakistan, we are seeing a lot of seasonal change. And especially, I think we'll speak about this. It happened this year, but it also happened my year. Pakistan's way, way hotter than Nepal and Tibet when you're climbing the 8,000 meter peaks. There were rivers opening up in the glacier when I was there in 2019. There were we were at, we're talking about a glacier at 17, 18,000 feet with massive raging rivers that were difficult to find crossings in. You could drown in if you got it wrong. Massive rockfall events, losing snow coverage that holds the mountain together up to over 20,000 feet. So it's going to be interesting to see if if future climbers start experimenting with different seasons or the edges of seasons.
So talk to us a little bit about your decision to climb K2, and kind of what I'm curious about is you've been climbing and guiding in the Himalaya since 2008, I believe.
Since 97 in the Himalaya.
Okay,
but
sorry,
on 8,000 meter
peaks
peaks since 2007.
2007. Okay. And you successfully summited Everest in 2017 without oxygen. Never made an attempt on K2 with oxygen prior to that. And then in 2019, you went to K2 without oxygen and had a successful climb. All along, you have refused to run commercial expeditions on K2. I know there's a history there and the fact that commercial expeditions haven't been running on K2 for that long. But, is there a reason that you didn't go to K2 any sooner? Did you always want to climb K2 without oxygen, or was there a part of you that wanted to make an attempt with oxygen? What was kind of behind the scenes on that decision there?
Yeah, it's such a good question. We could probably take the rest of the podcast with me just
Rambling.
rambling, but I'll try to keep it tight. So interestingly, K2 is actually where a lot of my passion and desire to climb big mountains started because of a movie that came out in the 90s called K2 The Ultimate High. I don't know if you remember this movie.
Oh, yeah.
Everyone should watch it.
You had the poster on your wall.
I had the poster on my wall, and I must have watched that movie, I don't know, I'm just going to make a number up, 60, 70, 80 times. It was a terrible movie and a terrible depiction of climbing 8,000 meter peaks. But for whatever reason, as like a teenage kid getting into climbing, dreaming of mountains, it completely captured me. I mean, I loved the historical books that were a lot more true and a lot more dry as well. But this film, I mean, when you see it, or if you just go to YouTube and watch the trailer, like as like a 15-year-old boy growing up in New England where there are no big mountains, like it just will make sense why I was so obsessed.
Do you still own the VHS?
I don't, but when I started doing, I obviously gave a lot of slideshows about climbing K2 without supplemental oxygen. So at that time, I started all my slideshows with the trailer for the film. And so I rewatched the film at that point, and man, I still loved it. But I had forgotten how terrible it was. Just like these completely generic stories of like the wife being left at home with the kid and the friendship between the two climbers and why they struggle and the ego versus respect. I mean, it's just so generic and so awesome. But so all that to say, so I had a lot of interest in K2 all my life as I started to do this. When I finally went to my first 8,000 meter peak in 2007, it was a peak called Choyu. When on that mountain, I really connected with a number of different people, including a Norwegian climber that was on Choyu and planning a K2 expedition in 2008, in the summer of 2008. So that winter, I spent a bunch of time with that K2 team, skiing and climbing in Chamonix where they were training, and was invited to join the team. And I had this really interesting decision to make in the spring or late winter of 2008, whether to go or not. And this really comes down to the two reasons why I never went to K2 for so many years. The first one was realizing at that time that I was already invited to Everest. So I was now going to Everest in the spring. I knew I was going to Choyu or later Manaslu in the fall. And if I went to K2 in the spring, I would spend 7 months of the year out of the United States on 8,000 meter peaks. At the time, I had a relationship that I really valued and was trying to hold together unsuccessfully, as it turns out. And I was trying to start my business. Like 2008 was like that kind of like crunch time. I was 3 or 4 years into Alpenglow, finally gaining a little bit of momentum. And obviously my reputation was growing because of the high altitude climbing stuff I had started doing, the 8,000 meter peak stuff that I had started doing in 2007. And I realized that if I went to all three, like things in my life would fall apart. So I had to not do one. And because the spring and the autumn ones were part of my building Alpenglow, I was bringing clients, I chose not to go that summer. And so that is actually one reason why Pakistan has never been a good fit for me, is I did every spring and every fall in the Himalaya for 15 years. And if you add the middle one,
then your name's Garrett Madison.
And we love Garrett, but it is hard to be that.
Absolutely.
And to prioritize other things in life. And so I made that decision then. To continue that story, my friends ended up going in 2008. In 2008, you might remember on K2 was the year of the massive accident where the Bottleneck Serac, which I'm sure we'll talk about, and I won't go into too much detail right now, but this dangerous part of the route dropped a massive amount of ice onto the climbing route above 8,000 meters. It immediately killed a few climbers who were in the bottleneck at the time, including my friend Rolf, who had invited me on this trip. And then a number of additional climbers died because they were above the ice fall and either were too exhausted or didn't have the skills to down solo the section of mountain where all the rope had been wiped out. And it was just this horrible accident that played out over a couple of days as other climbers tried to go up and look for bodies, tried to rescue people above the ice fall. People tried going off, accidentally went off the backside of the mountain and fell down on the Chinese side. Like just a horrible, horrible accident that
Wow.
involved someone I really cared for. And I just set it aside. Like, I don't need to climb that mountain. Like, Rolf was so damn strong and talented and at the beginning of his like career, just like me, and a completely random accident wiped him out. And we can have random accidents, but maybe that's the thing. It wasn't that random. Some like half of the fatalities on the mountain over the history of the mountain have happened in this one place. And if you talk to anyone who's been there, like, oh yeah, every single day, chunks of ice fall off the bottleneck from microwave size to small Tahoe cabin size. And it's just like, if you're in the wrong place, you're just gone.
Yeah, it's a wrong place, wrong time, but it's a place you have to cross and the timing is unknown.
Yep. That's the wild thing. There are basically two pretty attainable routes that are somewhat regularly climbed on K2, and then another dozen routes. All of those, except for the one route that our friend Galinda climbed from the Chinese side of the mountain, which has its own challenges. Other than that Chinese route, all the routes kind of culminate and come together under the bottleneck. There's been discussion for decades of finding a new route to the summit that doesn't go under the bottleneck. All attempts have kind of like gotten shut down by how hard the rock climbing is up there to avoid the bottleneck.
Wow. And so you had written K2 off very understandably for many years. And what changed for you?
Yeah, two things really changed for me that brought me back to K2. One was summiting Everest without supplemental oxygen and being so proud of that accomplishment, but also feeling like I could do more, number one. And number two, having that little niggling fear in the back of my head that maybe I only pulled off Everest because I knew it like the back of my hand. Like I had poured over a decade into this mountain and like maybe I essentially had the cheat code to Everest. So I wanted to try another mountain that I knew nothing about. And so K2 naturally percolated to the top of that because I'd been to Nepal, I'd been to Tibet. The only other place that had 8,000 meter peaks was Pakistan. Of the half dozen 8,000 meter peaks in Pakistan, K2 was clearly the most challenging, the most famous, and I had the most kind of like brain space that I thought a lot about this mountain, even though I had never gone to it. So that was one reason. And then the second reason was, you've heard this story before, that I was hanging out down in Argentina in between two Aconcagua trips that I was guiding for my company, Alpenglow Expeditions. I was having breakfast at this, like, imagine Mendoza, where you hang out when you're not on Aconcagua, is like maybe the most perfect small city in the world. It's like leafy and green, and every day it's 79 degrees and it never rains. And, you know, there's just so many fantastic people from around the world there that climbing brings in, as well as culture. There's great coffee, there's great red meat, there's great wine. So I'm setting the scene here. I'm out having this incredible lunch with a glass of wine.
And you're like, I want to go suffer again.
At a cafe restaurant. And some of my closest friends, Topo Esteban Mena and Carla Perez, are there as well, also just getting ready to guide on Aconcagua. And we had this big, long, multi-hour lunch. And at some point I asked them what their, plans were for the next couple of years. Carla had also just summited Everest without supplemental oxygen the year before me in 2016. The year I failed, she succeeded. And before Topo had a chance to answer, before anyone else at the table, Carla was like, I'm going to K2 next year and I'm going to do it without supplemental oxygen. And I was just like, what? Tell me everything. Like, how do you have this planned? Like, why do you dream about this? And so, we talked for the next 90 minutes about it. And I think at the end, like as the check came, I was sheepishly like, so would you guys think
I'll pick
about
up lunch
partner?
if I can come.
Like I was sold. Like Emily and I hadn't talked about it yet. Like I hadn't figured out how it could be possible for Alpenglow for me to leave for a whole summer. I didn't know how my body would react to, of course, going to Everest for a season and then going straight into K2. But I just knew like the right team was right there in front of me, Topo and Carla. And it was exactly like the fire was instantly so huge.
Interesting. And so do you think that you would have ever climbed K2 if it hadn't have been for that kind of that team alignment that you had there?
I don't think so. I think I would have ended up going to Pakistan, of course. I
Yeah.
probably would have chosen one of the Pakistani mountains for my next trip. But I'd obviously thought a lot about K2 in all those ensuing years. And one of the biggest reasons I always said, like, it's not right is I think that I knew the decision making around the risk would be so hard. And staying true to my values would be so hard once I was there. And I think it had to be with the right people. So I'm not saying I never would have gone. Maybe the other right partners would have come along, but that was an essential piece to this in a really different way than a lot of other things I do in the mountains, where like, going and attempting to ski Makalu, it didn't have to be with the right people, but this one did.
Interesting. And so let's talk a little bit about Pakistan. I think for me, it's one of the most interesting differences in Everest versus K2 is Everest, you drive on a paved road to base camp, or you can fly in a helicopter, or you can trek on a beautiful trek in a valley. And is that the same in Pakistan?
No, it's of course not the same. And you know that. That's why you asked the question. But I'd love to start the whole conversation with like trekking in Pakistan may be one of the coolest things that adventurous hikers can do. The Baltoro Glacier which is the glacier or trail that leads to the base of the Gasherbums, Broad Peak, K2, the Trangos, the wildest mountains in the world are up this valley, the Baltoro. And it is not easy, but it is one of the most stunning places. So the reason Pakistan is so different is, first of all, the tourism infrastructure is probably a couple of decades behind some of the places you mentioned, like Nepal and Tibet, and most of the places we run trips. That means that, there's certainly not lodges as you go up the valley. There's not super reliable portering or load carrying systems. Helicopters up to this point have been incredibly difficult to work with for rescue or for any other reason, since they're all military. And we're in a region that, while it feels very safe from a military and conflict perspective, it is considered a very sensitive region. So there's no air support allowed in the area that's not Pakistani military. And then the glacier is just like, I think you walk just on a regular trail for like 3 days. First of all, it's a long way. It's probably 70 miles to the base camp. They are slowly bringing a road further and further in, so that will change. But, you only walk for 2 or 3 days on a regular trail, and then you're walking on a glacier. You're often on rock moraines, but with ice on both sides. And then all of a sudden you have to be down on the ice and find a way through for a couple hours. And then you back up onto another rocky moraine. It's super broken. There's water running. It's very complicated. It's easy to get lost. You are having your equipment carried by porters, but also local porters, but also horses. Horses are like dying in the glacier and crevasse falls. It's like, it is hard and intense. And when you want to leave the mountain, there's essentially, although this is slowly changing, there's essentially no way to easily leave. It's like, okay, now I'm going to walk 70 miles. Or the other option is to go over, there is a shorter way out, but it's over a 21,000 foot glaciated pass. You can imagine if you're really sick or you have a broken leg and you need to go home, that's not a great option. We did exit that way. And it was like, it felt as dangerous as half of K2. Like, I couldn't believe what we did with porters without technical gear.
And that's not an option, just for the listeners, that's not an option going in, because you have to go over a 21,000 foot pass.
Right.
And the acclimatization isn't really feasible at that point. So
it only works to go out.
You have to go in the hard way and come out the less hard way.
Exactly. But so it's a rowdy approach. And then the other part of not having the infrastructure quite there yet is you still see a lot of issues that used to be part of the adventure in Nepal, but are now less so on the trek. Things like staff strikes, the relationship between staff, the local logistics agencies, and then the foreign climbers is still just complicated. And so that means that it's harder to get work done and fairly compensate for it and all those things. There's almost no thought put into trash or human waste. So there's just trash and human waste everywhere, even if you as a foreign climber endeavor to have your local logistics company bring all those things out. And then the third that naturally leads to is it means everyone in Pakistan gets sick. Like, there's just no such thing as not having GI illnesses in your team through a season. And Alpenglow, like, prides itself so deeply on having that piece of the puzzle figured out. And, now after running trips, not K2, but other 8,000 meter peaks along with treks in Pakistan for 4 years now, 5 years, it's still really difficult for us. And I wouldn't, if someone asked me, like, can you guarantee I'm not going to get sick? There's no way I could say yes. I would say by default, you will get sick. And if you don't, you were the exception.
And
the
you
sickness
yourself
is
got
just heinous.
pretty sick
on
your trek in.
I got it first, and then Carla Perez got it after me. And I got so sick, ended up attempting 3 different courses of antibiotics that didn't work over 10 days, lost a significant percentage of my body weight, and ultimately had to have a medication called Flagyl. It is often used for Giardia, but for quite serious illnesses that are not just bacterial. And ultimately Flagyl did work, but the reason we don't just carry Flagyl and use it right away is it basically is terrible for your body in many other ways and leaves you remarkably weakened. But anyway, 10 days of just heinous sickness where I absolutely did not think I could continue my climb. And then the worst part of it was it then bounced over to my teammate Carla Perez, and she had it for 18 more days or something, including her summer push. Despite having Flagyl there and able to get it on board quickly, these things just don't die easily. And I'd say my year there, probably 70% of climbers were dealing with something similar across every team on the mountain.
Wow.
Today's podcast is brought to you by Alpenglow Expeditions, a Tahoe-based guide company with an international reputation. In its 20th year of operations, Alpenglow leads the highest quality expeditions in some of the world's greatest mountain ranges, from California's High Sierra to the rugged Himalaya. Alpenglow runs more than 40 international expeditions per year, as well as offering a full menu of guided ski and climbing courses throughout California. Join us and experience the Alpenglow difference.
And so you make it to base camp, and base camp is just like Mount Everest, right? You've got espresso machines and, you're drinking whiskey and hanging out.
Yeah, no, I mean, again, it's just not possible to have some of those infrastructures. We brought a lot from Nepal along with Nepali Sherpa who came to work with us in Pakistan, because while the Pakistani climbers and porters are learning this craft, they're still not as technically skilled as Nepali Sherpa. And we and other companies are working really hard to try to transfer that knowledge. But it's just amazing that it's now possible to look back and realize when Alex Lowe passed away and his family and friends set up the Khumbu Climbing Center to educate high altitude workers. Essentially, what Pakistan calls porters are actually high altitude workers, right? They're porters that work high on the mountain. We don't call them Sherpa because obviously Sherpa refers to actually a tribal group in Nepal. So they're high altitude workers. In Nepal, the Khumbu Climbing Center started educating Nepali high-altitude workers 2 decades ago. And so now we have this incredible infrastructure and system of mentorship and education and certification amongst high-altitude workers in Nepal. It means they are much, much safer on the high mountains. And that enables them to do their job better for their employers. In Pakistan, that hasn't happened yet. And so while knowledge is slowly being moved from the mountain guides and the foreign climbers and the Nepali Sherpa to the Pakistani porters, high altitude workers, very few of them have reached a high degree of competency. That process just needs way more investment from all the foreign companies coming, from climbers, from government. There's no reason the Pakistani climbers can't be at that level, but they traditionally haven't been.
Mm-hmm. And so talk a little bit about the route and the climbing. You spoke about basically every step once you leave base camp off the flat glacier is steep and technical, but tell us a little bit about the sections of the mountain and kind of where those objective hazards lie and what some of the most challenging parts for you were.
Yeah, so there are 2 routes that are somewhat commonly climbed. The most common by far is called the Abruzzi route, and it was the route of the first ascent. It's actually not the route that I climbed. Topo, Kala, and I went to the Abruzzi. That was my preference of what to climb, just based on all my research in 2019 when I got there. And that's where all of the commercial teams on the mountain were planning to climb in 2019. When we got to the base of the route, I kind of recognized that there was pretty serious hazard between the flat glacier when you leave it and Camp 1, which sits 2,000 feet up on that route. But maybe I didn't honor it as much as I should have. And as we were climbing that first section of the route, a climber above, close to Camp 1, kicked off a big, hot, wet avalanche with a lot of rocks in it. And we were lucky to get out of its way by climbing a small, like, riblet in the glacier. And it passed by us, probably ran for, I don't know, it felt like 2 minutes. Just anyone in it would have been killed. Undoubtedly, massive debris pile at the bottom. And it just really turned me off the Abruzzi, because our Sherpa teammates who were there, including one Paulden who had been on the mountain before, was like, oh yeah, that happens like every day, like every couple of days. It's just there's so much heat during the climbing season. We had an unusually warm season. This season, that is in this 2025 season, we talked a little bit about this in our news. That place, that 2,000 foot face, actually melted all the way out. It avalanched all the way to the rocks underneath it. And this year, that's where there was so much rockfall hazard. Regardless, so we decided to move one rib. You climb a rib on K2, so hopefully stuff falls away from you instead of onto you. We talk a lot about that on this podcast. Yeah, and even though the climbing is more difficult and more technical, when you climb a rib, you avoid some of that. When we were going up that 2,000 foot snow face at Avalanche, we were trying to get to the rib we would climb, the Abruzzi Ridge. We moved one ridge over called the Chesson route, named for its first ascensionist. And that route is a bit steeper, a bit more technical rock and ice climbing, but the rib starts almost all the way at the bottom. So you don't have that initial couple of thousand feet. You have like 800 feet. It was still horrifying at times. We ended up doing almost all our climbing at night, but even at night, it was so warm that we weren't getting good refreezes. So you still had issues even climbing at night, but we were able to more quickly getting on to the Chesson rib. In the end, a couple of other teams agreed that the Chesson was a good idea. So all season, 80% of climbers were on the Abruzzi route and 20% of climbers were on the Chesson. And we only had to work with the other teams on the Chesson to put that route in. The two routes join at the highest camp at about 8,000, just below 8,000 meters, and then do the same route to the summit.
And is it fixed lines all the way?
Fixed lines all the way. Traditionally, before the era of commercial guiding, which more or less started in 2014 with Madison Mountaineering, before that era of commercial guiding, the route would still be majority fixed. The climbing is just too technical and it's impractical based on the dangers to just set up rappels to rappel down. You and your teammates set up rappels. It's much, much faster for the teams to work together to put in one set of ropes and everyone to use them. And I think that's often like, of course, people see fixed ropes, they make the climbing easier. And some climbers, core climbers especially, are like, oh, that's not real climbing. It is real climbing. It's a conscious decision on some mountains made that this increases the safety margin for us or reduces the hazard. It would be crazy to go up and down K2. You either want to be soloing or you want to be on a fixed rope. I don't want to be pitching climbing.
Yeah.
And so that's the decision that needs to be made. And in this case, most of that route is technical enough that most climbers would want it all fixed.
And so you get up to the highest camp where the two kind of main routes that are climbed join. And what's beyond that?
Yeah. And so basically, this is the one flat place on the mountain. The two mountains join on this little bump or hump at just below 8,000 meters. Above that, you have a constantly steepening snow slope that leads you up to a bottleneck, essentially. Imagine like a why did I just lose?
An hourglass.
Hourglass. Thank you, God. Sand timer to an hourglass where everything gets funneled in, and you have to go through this couloir for felt like forever. It was probably only 800 vertical feet or something like that. You're in a couloir through this huge rock band, climbing snow and ice in a rock band. That's where everything from above you gets funneled, and that's where it's really, really dangerous because unfortunately, above that hourglass sits the Bottleneck Serac. A Serac, like probably most listeners know, is a overhanging piece of ice on a big mountain, usually where a glacier that builds constantly, glaciers move, then they hit a cliff. As they go over that cliff, it becomes overhanging. The friction, the cohesiveness of the ice can't hold together, and sections fall off the bottom. That's essentially a serac. This one happens to be, 800 feet tall by a half mile wide and incredibly active. It's moving down the mountain meters each year, which cause sections to be constantly calving off. And all those sections funnel from this half mile wide thing into this one descent path, which also happens to be the weakness we climb. Once we go through that, we get through that, and actually you hit the Bottleneck Serac. This is even worse. Then you have to walk underneath it. So you're above the rock band that you've just passed through, below the overhanging Serac, and you go underneath the entire fucking thing, just looking up at you. Like, it is unbelievable to believe you're there. But there is this perfect little sidewalk path. Like, it makes sense why the route goes that way. Easy walking across this sidewalk until you finally turn the corner and go up on what they call the triangle face. Also turned out my year to be really dangerous because it's this classic like 38 to 40 degree snow slope that wind just piles snow into. Go up that triangle face to pass the 800-foot Serac. Once you're above that, I finally felt confidence that I could summit this mountain. If you watched a video about K2 that we put out, I'm just like crying and trying to talk on the radio and blubbering because I finally knew I wasn't going to die, at least on the way up. And it becomes like a lower angle rib to the summit.
And so between the Bottleneck Couloir, the Bottleneck Serac sidewalk, and the triangle face, how much time do you think you're spending in this like period and zone of extremely high objective hazard?
Yeah, well, this is the thing. If you're using oxygen, you're probably under the Bottleneck Serac, so either in the hourglass or walking under it for 2 hours or less, hour and a half, 2 hours. For me, it took 6.5 hours just for that section. The triangle face took another few hours, but the good thing was that face, which for most of the season was pretty avalanche prone my season, got hit by 200 mile per hour winds, ripped all of the snow away, and it was just gleaming million-year-old, many thousand-year-old blue ice.
You never thought you'd be so happy to see blue ice.
It was really difficult to climb without oxygen, like actually front pointing for 1,000 feet.
But significantly safer.
But it was completely safe. I could take all day there and not be scared.
Yeah.
That was unique to my season. That's not that common. But so 6+ hours in that kind of like shooting gallery.
And then descending another, how long?
For me, I bet I didn't spend more than an hour in it going down.
Still, 7.5 hours total in the barrel of a shotgun.
Lots of time to think, actually. And yeah, if there's one regret, I'm like, on this mountain, I kind of realized that like how different Everest is than K2 in terms of like that last 300 meters on Everest. I was essentially blacked out, didn't even remember like meeting and hugging Kilian Jornet. That's a story I've told on this podcast before. But like, on K2, the altitude from 8,000 to 8,400 meters of that like bottleneck, it's high enough that I was slow, but it wasn't high enough to turn off my brain. Like I was just with it the whole 6.5 hours thinking about like how easy it would be to end up on the puffy cloud looking down, like not having had it be my day. And that was a pretty interesting process for me to go through.
Mm-hmm.
But that's not what this podcast is about.
And so you had success. You made it down successfully. Looking back, was it as dangerous as you all along kind of thought it was? Was the hazard in your experience, did it match what you had kind of created in your head for so many years?
That's a good question. Before I answer it, just because like it's so easy to like throw out like, I had success. Like I had success because of the people around me. The mountain was largely fixed up to 8,500 meters. So through the bottleneck, but not over the triangle face by a combination of my team and Madison Mountaineering and other teams who spent all season on the mountain. Kari Kalber, there were a couple of others. Then only my team and Elite Expeditions team stayed for this final summit push. And we kind of negotiated who would do what up there. And Elite's team did the triangle face, which was now hard blue ice. I'm sure not easy fixing. So I'm very appreciative to that. And then our team fixed the final section of the summit after Elite ran out of rope. And so, I think that's important. And also that I had Topo, a full mountain guide on oxygen, filming me. He was officially hired to film, but of course helping me to make good decisions up there, along with two Sherpa that just care for so much. Palden Namgye, who's climbed all of my hard peaks with me and all of my mountain guiding, and Pemba Gelji. They really helped to make this possible, helped, with really just a lot of the carrying down lower on the mountain. And then on this summit day, a lot of the trail breaking that needed to be done on the summit push that I really would have struggled to do down lower on the mountain. Before we hit the blue ice, all that snow went somewhere and a lot of it went down below. And there was a lot of hard breakable trail, like knee deep breakable, just the worst possible type of climbing. And thanks to those guys, I didn't have to do a single step of breaking. So just want to throw that out there.
Team efforts.
And I'm very cognizant that I didn't do this alone. Kala also summited with me in awesome style without oxygen. So to your question though, it was as dangerous as I thought it was. And the best representation, the proof is in the pudding kind of answer to that is especially after I climbed it. Before I got asked to guide K2 quite a bit, but now I get asked so much to guide K2. And my answer every time is no, regardless of the amounts of money I and Alpenglow Expeditions have been offered. And then the second piece is Topo supported me and Kala to do this, and he climbed with oxygen. He very badly wants to climb K2 without supplemental oxygen and asked me a few years ago if I'd go back and support him like he did me. And my answer was no, I will not go back to a route on that mountain that goes through the bottleneck. So my answer to him was actually not 100% no. It was if we can go from China and climb the north side of the mountain,
then you're in.
I'm in. He's just got to figure out the logistics for that. And we can talk a little bit about that. But so all of that is kind of these are not light words that I'm throwing around. I really believe the risk of that mountain, both the rockfall avalanche risk down low, that's a little more predictable in the heat and cold. But the problem is it goes for weeks. And so you could say it's predictable, but it's also you came here, you knew the risks. Are you really not going to climb for 2 weeks and lose all your acclimatization because you got a hot spell on the mountain? So it's very hard to, even though it's predictable, it's very hard to just sit in base camp and decide you're not climbing anymore. And I think that probably had a lot to do with what happened this season and how many rockfall injuries there were. It's not that you don't have to be a wise old mountaineer to understand rockfall and wet avalanche risk down low on a big mountain when it snows a meter and then the temperature is 50 degrees, or when it hasn't snowed and all the rocks that were covered for 6 months are now uncovered. These aren't complicated risks, but it is complicated to say, okay, we're just gonna hope it chills out in August. It's hard.
Yeah.
And then the bottleneck was everything I thought it would be, even though nothing came down on top of us in that 6 hours. But in the 2 hours getting up to that, or in the lower pod, we walked through so much debris, Serac fall debris.
Yeah.
And so much, I walk through avalanche or Serac debris all the time. But usually the edges are rounded. You can tell yourself it's been there for a year. It's been there for months. It's softened. It's been covered by snowstorms, things like that. This is fresh Serac fall from many different falls because you can see the level of freshness. And it's just oh, it's true. Stuff's falling every couple of days, every few days, all season. There was just no doubt in my mind that people will continue to die there.
Yeah. And so tell us a little bit about the Chinese side. Obviously we talk a lot about climbing in China through our conversations around Everest, and China, the Chinese side of Everest is logistically much more complicated than the south side or the Nepali side of Everest. But we have a pretty good relationship through Alpenglow with the Chinese government and the CTMA, and we're able to rather consistently make it happen without challenge. What about the Chinese side of K2? Is it similar? Are there differences? I would assume you're not in the Tibetan Autonomous Region, so maybe it's approached differently by the Chinese government.
Yeah, that's exactly right. So you would be going through Western China and some other very tourism limited areas of China to gain access to the north side of K2. And as far as I know, it hasn't been done in more than a decade. But when it was being done, the last time I know it was done was by an Austrian climber named Galinda, who became the first woman to climb all 14 8,000 meter peaks without supplemental oxygen. And she was able to approach from the north side. And it is a dream type of expedition that if I got an invite to go, I would really struggle not to go. You actually have to ride camels for a couple of weeks to get to the north side of the mountain. So there's no tourism infrastructure whatsoever. So imagine flying, jeeping, and then working with locals to use camels to bring all your equipment plus your people. And an interesting challenge is you cross a huge river to get there. I can't remember the name of it, but the only way to cross is early in the season when it's still frozen. And so you can get across the river and get to the base. Then you wait until the climbing season is good, climb the mountain, and you don't leave again until temperatures start cooling down. It doesn't have to refreeze, but the water has to stop running. So basically, like all the snow melt spring snow melt has to kind of be done, if you imagine it like in the US.
And do you know generally what that time frame is?
We're talking about like a 3-month expedition instead of a 2-month expedition.
Yeah.
Hypoxic training is not going to help you. But imagine that level of adventure. And then you are there and you're there. That's it. Perhaps now there's military helicopter ability if you had an accident. I'm guessing there wasn't back when most of the ascents on that side of the mountain have been done. But so I'm not sure access is possible today from everything I've heard from friends who have tried to get permits to not only the north side of K2, but the north side of the Gasherbrum. Same thing, have just massive alpine potential on incredible north faces, but access is truly, truly difficult.
And hypothetically speaking, you, Topo, and Carla, and maybe a handful of the Sherpa guides that you mentioned earlier are going on a north side of K2 expedition. Are you fixing that route or are you trying to climb it in a different style?
My goal would be to fix up to the high camp so you can acclimatize to 8,000 meters and move up and down. Since you're doing multiple trips, that would make sense. But then with a group of good climbers, I don't think you'd be fixing above the high camp. You'd basically be going for it. The climbing is not super technical on that side of the mountain up high.
Mm-hmm.
It's probably quite a bit safer without the bottleneck.
Yep.
And you'd just be trying to like move fast, get up and get back down.
Move fast, but not on oxygen for Topo. So
that's right.
Move
so
slow,
don't move that fast.
Man.
So that's a dream. And, I've had people be like, that'll never happen. But like what I see is like, we are not good at predicting world politics and where we can and can't go to. I didn't think we wouldn't be running trips in Russia anymore. I didn't know when we would be running trips in Papua New Guinea again. And I don't think we really know, sitting here in our little recording studios in Tahoe, when China begins to support exploration of their mountains again. And there's so much potential in China for skiing, for rock climbing, for mountaineering. And there will be a time. It's not today.
Yep. But don't write it off.
Don't write it off.
And in theory, the Chinese government is really supporting the sport of skiing. Now we're talking about resort skiing, but the sport of skiing in China.
Yep.
And the CTMA would be the same governing agency that would allow access to this region. And the relationship is rather solid. So it could be sooner.
Unfortunately not. The CTMA only manages climbing in Tibet. That's why it's called the Chinese Tibetan Mountaineering Association. And we're talking about a different province. And there is no current mountaineering association for this area.
So maybe it would be the CTMA.
So limited. Maybe.
And then it just becomes the CMA.
It'll just become the CMA.
Wow. Oh, it sounds like a dream. And honestly, like the adventure alone, just getting to base camp sounds like an incredible adventure.
Totally. I 100% agree. I feel like even if down the road, let's say this opportunity doesn't come for another decade and I decide I shouldn't go to the summit anymore, the opportunity to support an expedition and get to do that trek and be in that base camp, I think it would be incredible.
Yep. And so moving back to Pakistan and away from K2, you spoke highly of Pakistan and the trek in. You have no interest in going back to the Pakistani side of K2. Are there any other dreams in the Baltoro Valley of Pakistan for you? What's you got one expedition? Where are you going?
If I had only one expedition, it would probably be to Nameless Tower with them to attempt the rock climbing route called the Eternal Flame.
Yep.
Which has seen a bunch of action over the past few years and more free climbing. So people can find out lots more about that, but just world-class granite rock climbing on a 20,000 foot peak. Just incredible. But if I was forced to say an 8,000 meter peak, skiing G1 and G2, attempting both, single base camp, an ice fall that needs to be respected, but then truly skiable lines on two 8,000 meter peaks.
No oxygen?
Definitely no oxygen. Lower 8,000 meter peaks that I think really support that style.
Absolutely. Awesome. Well, really great hearing about K2. Appreciate your insight there. And we'll be looking forward to hearing about your Chinese side expedition with Topo in the next couple of years.
You heard it, Topo. We're going.
Awesome. Well, Adrian, I know you are packing up for Pakistan. You're packing up for Patagonia soon.
Yes.
What's going in your duffel bag? What's the first thing you're putting in this year?
We asked every guest, so I'm the guest all of a sudden.
You are the guest. I mean, I interviewed you.
Shoot. I mean, we've had so many great answers from guests recently. I guess my easy one is because it's right in front of me, I'm going to bring my AG1. Now,
because Patagonia is a meat and potatoes type place, and you need a little bit of vegetables down there, right?
It's actually true. I'm sure a lot of our listeners know AG1. I've been using it on expeditions forever, places where I essentially can't get lots of fresh resupplies of vegetables and fruit, even though we really try to. And I think it's really helped me as we've started sharing it more and more with our members, teammates, clients. People really appreciate it. And then that is kind of like the next phase is me realizing that actually I struggle to eat really healthily in a lot of my travel to developing countries, not only when I'm actually deep in the mountains on an expedition.
I mean, honestly, I struggle to eat healthy when I go to Europe because I just want to eat bread and cheese. So
so true. Or on long flights, all these different things. And so, AG1's just kind of become part of my routine, and so I won't copycat the answer of a Kindle or an iPhone or my AirPods that we hear so often. I'll bring my AG1
and some extra underwear for Arrow on this long flight that he's potty training.
His packing, I think we're going to make him carry his own little backpack for the first time, because it's so cute, even if it doesn't actually help at all. And I think a few pairs of underwear and wipes. I think someone said wipes was the one thing they were going to pack, and actually that's a great answer as well, because I keep thinking we're out of the phase where you need wipes with your baby. And I just feel like I need more and more and more wipes. Like we went to the farmer's market this morning. It's just covered in
berries,
chocolate and raspberries and strawberry juice. And I'm just I hate sticky. I'm just not into sticky mess. And it turns out that's all a toddler is.
All right. So you heard it. AG1 and wet wipes.
Exactly right.
Awesome. We'll have a great time in Patagonia, and we'll talk to you soon.
Absolutely. Hopefully we'll record a session from there. Give you the update. Thanks, Sam.
Thanks for listening to the Duffel Shuffle podcast. You can follow along on Instagram, where we post our favorite clips from each episode, as well as more about the world of climbing, skiing, and mountaineering. If you haven't already, please subscribe, rate us, and leave us a review on your favorite podcast platform. Catch you next time, and until then, we hope you enjoy some time outside.